More false claims about the trans community have exploded on social media after the school shooting in Canada. So I have an article here. This is from cbc.ca. Stick around, I'll talk about it in a sec. It says, after Tumbler Ridge shooting, false claims about trans people have proliferated online. Claims about an epidemic of trans shooters circulating on social media are false, say experts. Marnie Penas, a trans activist based in Edmonton, says her heart broke when she saw news of Tuesday's mass shooting in Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia, leaving 9 people dead, including the suspect, and 27 others injured. Later, when rumors started to percolate that the suspect in the shooting was a trans woman, Penas watched what she says has become a predictable pattern emerge online. Within minutes, she says some people began to leverage the tragedy to advance hate against the trans community. She said, this will just get uglier now for us and for our community as a whole, when our attention should be on the care of these victims and to support communities. I agree with her. So hours before police had confirmed the identity of the suspect, anger and false claims were already being directed at the trans community online. Some pundits, politicians, and right-wing news outlets began posting about what they called an epidemic of violence by trans people. But experts say there's no evidence to support this trend, and trans advocates worry that these claims will do nothing but harm an already marginalized community. American right-wing political commentator Matt Walsh was among the pundits weighing in on social media Wednesday, telling his 4 million followers on X that trans people are the most dangerous and unstable group in existence, and it's not close. And he did not provide evidence to support his claim, and obviously that's not true. James Densley, co-founder of the Violence Prevention Project, which tracks mass shootings in the U.S., says the claims that some are making about an epidemic of mass shootings by trans people are not true and can be refuted by statistical evidence. In the U.S., 97.5% of mass shootings in his database were carried out by cisgender men, those who identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. 2% of those shootings were carried out by cisgender women, and only 0.5% were carried out by trans people, making trans people statistically underrepresented. And remember that, because I'm going to talk about statistically underrepresented in a minute. Densley says the false perception that there are more mass shootings carried out by trans people can be attributed in part to what's known as base rate neglect, which is the idea that even a couple of incidents in a short window can make something feel like a pattern even when it's not. He said, when a shooter is transgender, that fact becomes the story, especially on social media, whereas when the shooter is male, their identity is never really mentioned because it's unremarkable. In other words, it's not memorable because it's just another male. He said that creates an asymmetry in the coverage where people will recall all the unusual cases because they're unusual. So in other words, things that are more rare are more memorable. And we also know that right-wing news has manufactured anger towards the trans community for years now. So their uneducated base is wanting someone other than themselves to be responsible for all these mass shootings. They want to avoid responsibility because that's what Republicans stand for. Just look at Trump and Epstein and Trump's entire administration. This whole presidency was to cover up their own crimes. Back to the article. Densley, who is also a professor of criminology at Metro State University in Minnesota, says the demographic of mass shooters is overwhelmingly male. And that's been consistent for decades. He says the online discourse is troubling, noting a long and ugly history of people associating an entire marginalized group with mass violence based on a statistically negligible number of cases. So we just went through this with Charlie Kirk's murder. Due to dishonest Republicans in America in government, they misled the public to believe that he was murdered by a trans person or that this had something to do with trans identity. And then it turned into Tyler Robinson was the shooter and he just had a trans partner. And then it became, no, they were just roommates at one point. And then it became, where the hell is this trans person and do they even exist? I seriously doubt a lot of the stuff that the FBI and the government was saying at this time. And all of the circumstances surrounding this killing are extremely suspicious. There are many accusations within Turning Point that Turning Point itself had something to do with killing Charlie Kirk. In the moment Charlie was killed, he was spreading false information about mass shootings and trans people. Someone had asked how many trans people were committing mass shootings in America, and his answer was too many. But let's talk about this. How many were there actually? Because he was lying. Less than half a percentage point. So this was over a 60-year period that they did this study. So from 1966 to 2024, there was one mass shooting by a trans person. That's the 0.5%. There were 195 mass shootings committed by cisgender males. There were 4 committed by cisgender women. So cisgender women are 4 times as likely to commit a mass shooting than a trans woman. In relation to trans people being unrepresented or underrepresented in these numbers, what that means is that statistically, since trans people are 1% of the population in America, there should be more than one trans shooter in these numbers based on the statistics alone. But the fact that there isn't means trans people are less likely to commit a mass shooting than a cisgender person, male or female. So his answer, too many, is part of the anti-gender disinformation that Turning Point and other right-wing cults are guilty of. After Charlie died, the conspiracies ran wild, and it's apparent to the world that a portion of America denies reality. They deny facts, research, statistics, and all expert advice, including the advice of all major medical associations. And I found today there's an entire Wikipedia page dedicated just to the misinformation about violence by trans people. Look it up. This is all part of what is called the anti-gender movement, which is a movement that denies science, it denies reality, it denies experts, and denies all the LGBTQ people themselves on these issues. So in other words, these are highly delusional people. On social media, these delusional right-wingers are being paid by Israel and Republican politicians that are paid by Israel. So they are paid to say certain things and not say other things. There are swarms of bot accounts to support these content creators, so their fame is just an illusion. But let's remember, these are the same people who are denying vaccines and dying of COVID and measles right now. They're denying science, they're prioritizing fantasy and delusion, and they're denying reality when it comes to politics and literally vote against themselves. Red states are in the worst position right now. That is true stupidity to vote against your own interests. This is what makes the Republican Party so weak. Because when a lie falls apart, the whole structure falls apart. And that's what we're seeing right now with the Republican Party. It's a goddamn mess. They cannot lead, they cannot be honest, and we should never count on Republicans for truth in anything. Republicans are corrupt, they're harboring sexual predators, and there's a long, long history of this. We cannot address the real problem, which is white cisgender males being raised in gun culture from childhood, until we realize that trans people are only a tiny percentage of this, so tiny that they're statistically underrepresented.